This video will talk about the relevance and mechanisms of evolution. When we try to understand how the Earth has changed, we also try to understand how the biological processes that take place have caused disruptions in the organismal equilibrium. You see, populations evolve, but individual organisms do not. A population is an interbreeding group of individuals of one species in a given geographic area at the same time. A population evolves because the population contains the collection of genes called the gene pool. As changes in the gene pool occur, a population eventually evolves. This part of the lesson will discuss major evolutionary forces that have created the variations in the species. Specifically, this aims to explain the mechanisms that produce change in populations from generation to generation, such as artificial selection, natural selection, genetic drift, mutation, and sexual recombination. It was in 1859 that Darwin's book on the origin of species by means of natural selection was published. The theory of natural selection was Charles Darwin's explanation of how evolution happens. Evolution refers to the cumulative inherited change in a population of organisms through time, leading to the appearance of new forms or traits. Certain ideas illustrated shows how natural selection works. Charles Darwin had no knowledge of modern genetic concepts and therefore had no knowledge of the genetic principles that are the basis of evolutionary theory as it exists today. The modern version of his theory can be summarized as follows. First, all organisms have a far greater reproductive potential than is ever realized. For example, a female blue marlin produces about 30 million eggs per year, 200 billion or more sperms per year. What if all of these eggs and sperms become fertilized? Could you just imagine how the 30 million blue marlin fry would fill the oceans? Second, inherited variations exist. They arise from a variety of sources, including mutation, genetic recombination, and random fertilization. Seldom are any two individuals exactly alike. Some of these genetic variations may confer an advantage to the individual possessing them, making them harmful. In other instances, variations may be harmful to an individual. In still other instances, particular variations may be neither helpful nor harmful, and these are said to be neutral. These variations can be passed on to offspring. Third, because resources are limited, existence is a constant struggle. Many more offspring are produced than resources can support. Therefore, many individuals die. Darwin reasoned that the individuals die are those with the traits or variations that make survival and successful reproduction less likely. Traits that promote successful reproduction are said to be adaptive. Fourth, adaptive traits become more common in subsequent generations. Because organisms with maladaptive traits are less likely to reproduce, the maladaptive traits become less frequent in a population. With these ideas in addition, Darwin's theory explained how some animals, such as the ancient South American horses, could become extinct. Natural selection, according to Darwin, occurs when populations of organisms are subjected to the environment. The fittest creatures are more likely to survive and pass their genes to their offspring, producing more producing a population that is better adapted to the environment. The genes of less fit individuals are less likely to be passed on to the next generation. The important selective force in natural selection is the environment. Different types of natural selection can impact the distribution of phenotypes within a population. In stabilizing selection, an average phenotype is favored, such as robins typically lay 4 eggs, an example of stabilizing selection. In stabilizing selection, an average phenotype is favored. Robins typically lay 4 eggs, an example of stabilizing selection, and larger clutches may result in malnourished chicks, while smaller clutches may result in no viable offspring. In directional selection, a change in the environment shifts the spectrum of phenotypes observed. Bright-colored peppered moths are better camouflaged against a pristine environment. Likewise, dark-colored peppered moths are better camouflaged against a sooty environment. Thus, as the Industrial Revolution progressed in 19th century, the color of the moth population shifted from light to dark. It's an example of directional selection. In diversifying selection, two or more extreme phenotypes are selected for, while the average phenotype is selected against. In a hypothetical population, gray and Himalayan rabbits are better able to blend with a rocky environment than white rabbits, resulting in diversifying selection. Then we have mutation, which is a source of new alleles in a population. Mutation is a change in the DNA sequence of the gene. A mutation can change one allele into another, but the net effect is change in frequency. The change in frequency resulting from mutation is small, so its effect to environment is small unless it interacts with one of the other factors such as selection. A mutation can have one of three outcomes on the organism's appearance or phenotype. First, a mutation may affect the phenotype of the organism in a way that gives it reduced fitness, lower likelihood of survival, resulting in fewer offspring. Second, a mutation may produce a phenotype with a beneficial effect on fitness. And many mutations, called neutral mutations, will have no effect on fitness. Mutations may be harmful or benign, but they may also be beneficial. For example, a mutation may permit organisms in a population to produce enzymes that will allow them to use certain food materials. Over time, these types of individuals survive, while those that don't have the mutations are more likely to perish. Therefore, natural selection tends to remove the less fit individuals, allowing more fit individuals to survive and form a population. Harmful mutations are removed from the population by selection and will generally only be found in very low frequencies equal to the mutation rate. Beneficial mutations will spread through the population through selection, although that initial spread is slow. Whether or not a mutation is beneficial or harmful is determined by whether it helps an organism survive to sexual maturity and reproduce. It should be noted that mutation is the ultimate source of genetic variation in all populations, new alleles, and therefore, new genetic variations arise through mutation. Another mechanism for evolution is the genetic drift, which can occur when a small group of individuals leave a population and establishes a new one in a geographically isolated region. For example, when a small population of frog is placed in a swamp area far away from its origin, the frog population will evolve into one that is different from the original. Fitness of a population is not considered in genetic drift, nor does genetic drift occur in a very large population. Genetic drift occurs because the alleles in an offspring generation are a random sample of the alleles in the parent generation. Alleles may or may not make it into the next generation due to chance events, including mortality of an individual, events affecting finding a mate, and even the events affecting which gametes end up in fertilizations. If one individual in a population of 10 individuals happen to die before it leave any offspring to the next generation, all of its genes, a tenth of the population's gene pool, will be suddenly lost. Genetic drift can also be magnified by natural or human caused events, such as a disaster that randomly kills a large portion of the population. This is known as the bottleneck effect that results in a large portion of genome suddenly being wiped out. In one fell swoop, the genetic structure of the survivors becomes the genetic structure of the entire population, which may be very different from the pre-disaster population. When disaster strikes, an ecosystem can change very quickly. When an event causes a drastic decrease in a population, it can cause the type of genetic drift called a bottleneck effect. Another scenario in which populations might experience a strong influence of genetic drift is if some portion of the population leaves to start a new population in a new location, or if a population gets divided by a physical barrier of some kind. In this situation, those individuals are unlikely to be representative of the entire population, which results in the founder effect. The founder effect can take place due to many different circumstances. The founder effect can be due to geographical isolation, when a small population of individuals migrates to a new area. Another mechanism of evolution may occur during the migration of individuals from one group or location to another. When the migrating individuals interbreed with the new population, they contribute their genes to the gene pool of the local population. In the graphic, the gene version for brown coloration moves from one population to another. This establishes gene flow in the population. Gene flow occurs, for example, when wind carries seeds far beyond the bounds of the parent plant population. Also, animals may be driven off from a herd. This forces them to migrate to a new population, thereby bringing new genes to a gene pool. Gene flow tends to increase the similarity between remaining populations of the same species because it makes gene pools more similar to one another. While some populations are fairly stable, others experience more flux. Many plants, for example, send their seeds far and wide by wind or in the guts of animals, and these seeds may introduce alleles common in the source population to a new population in which they are rare. Gene flow is also called migration. Again, this is any movement of individuals and or the genetic material they carry from one population to another. Gene flow includes lots of different kinds of events, such as pollen being blown to a new destination or people moving to new cities or countries. If gene versions are carried to a population where those gene versions previously did not exist, gene flow can be a very important source of genetic variation. Then we have sexual recombination. Recombination occurs during meiosis when chromosomes exchange genes. This process ultimately leads to the formation of unique gametes with chromosomes that are different from those in parents. This is one of the important means to promote and increase genetic diversity between generations. Recombination occurs during meiosis when chromosomes exchange genes. This process ultimately leads to the formation of unique gametes with chromosomes that are different from those in parents. This is one of the important means to promote and increase genetic diversity between generations. Imagine through the years, many new traits have appeared in a population. But before a new species can be formed, another condition is necessary. Something must have prevented mating between individuals of the same species outside that population. This phenomenon is called isolation. There are several kinds of reproductive barriers, such as geographic barrier, where two populations can be separated by bodies of water or mountains, for instance, which prevents interbreeding among the individuals of the two populations. The members of each population breed only among themselves. Another reproductive barrier is incompatibility of reproductive structures that make mating impossible. Then we have artificial selection, which is the process of selection conducted under human direction. For example, by allowing only like individuals to breed, breeders have created the variety of dogs and crop plants. Then we have speciation. A species is a group of individuals that share a number of features and are able to interbreed with one another, producing fertile or non-sterile offspring. When individuals of one species mate with individuals of a different species, any offspring are usually sterile. A species is also defined as a population whose members share common gene pool. A new species is formed when the individuals of a population continue to breed among themselves over a long period of time and eventually accumulate a new set of traits unique to them. Said traits are already different from those of the original species. This mechanism is called speciation. This is how a new species evolves from an older one. By then, the individuals of the new and the original species can no longer breed with each other, or if they can, their offspring will be sterile. The preceding slides cite factors that bring about speciation, and these are mutation, natural selection, genetic drift, isolation, a new combination of genes in gene flow, and artificial selection. Fundamental to the process is genetic variation upon which selective forces can act in order for evolution to occur. This video examines the mechanisms of evolution, focusing on natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, gene flow, sexual recombination, we have isolation, speciation, and artificial selection as mechanisms of change.